Here is the truth about Chinese Marine Force structure. This is the real one. Some analysts make a big mistake saying China Marines have only 6 brigades. The real difference is between peacetime and messy time. And the real force structure is built by the theater command. The PLAN only has a few landing ships, Type 075, Type 071. Not enough for the invasion to the other side.
Almost every defense channel that covers a possible Taiwan invasion starts with the same chart. It shows the People Liberation Army Navy Marine Corps, 8 brigades strong, 6 maneuver units plus 1 Special Operations Brigade plus 1 Aviation Brigade, all neatly boxed under the PLA Navy. The chart is accurate. The conclusion drawn from it is not. Viewers are told this 8-brigade force is the invasion fleet, the spearhead that will hit the other side, beaches, and that its apparent modest size is either reassuring or alarming depending on the channel angle. Neither reaction is correct, because the chart being shown is a peacetime administrative structure, not a messy time order of battle. Confusing the two is the single most common analytical error in open source commentary on this subject. An administrative structure tells you who trains a unit, who pays for its equipment, and which headquarters signs its orders during peacetime. It does not tell you who actually goes ashore first, in what numbers, or under whose command once a real campaign begins. Militaries around the world separate these two things for good reason, and the People Liberation Army is no exception. Understanding that separation is the key to understanding what a occupying the other side scenario would actually look like, and it is the thread this entire discussion will follow. The PLA Marine Corps sits under the PLA Navy, not the PLA Army, and this is worth stating plainly because it is often blurred in casual commentary. It is one of 5 service arms of the PLAN, manned, trained, and equipped through naval channels rather than ground force channels. Before 2017, it consisted of just 2 brigades, based in Zhangji and Guangdong, totaling roughly 12,000 personnel, a force comparable in size to formations like the British Royal Marines. Reforms beginning in 2017 changed that picture substantially, and by the early 2020s, open source reporting converged on a force of 8 brigades. That 8-brigade force breaks down into 6 maneuver brigades, 1 Special Operations Brigade based in Sanyo on Hainan Island, and 1 Aviation Brigade providing organic helicopter support. Open source estimates put total strength at roughly 40,000 personnel today, with a publicly stated long-term ambition of scaling toward a much larger force over time. Individual brigade strength is not precisely documented in the open literature, so any per-brigade figure should be read as a rough estimate rather than a confirmed number. Every one of these brigades reports up through PLAN Marine Corps headquarters to the PLA Navy, a chain of command entirely separate from the PLA Army-owned amphibious forces. This is the picture that ends up on most infographics, and as far as it goes, it is correct. What the chart leaves out is readiness. Open source analysis from the US Naval War College China Maritime Studies Institute notes that the 1st and 2nd Brigades, based in Zhangjiang with direct access to port and rail infrastructure, stood out as having the most developed embarkation experience and the highest near-term readiness among the 6 maneuver brigades. The remaining brigades, while administratively counted, may not carry the same near-term combat readiness. A paper structure of 8 brigades is not the same as 8 brigades ready to fight tomorrow. And that distinction matters just as much as the civilian military one. Here is the piece almost every popular breakdown omits entirely. The PLA Army also maintains its own amphibious combined arms brigades, 6 of them, distributed across 3 group armies, the 72nd, 73rd, and 74th. These are Army formations, not Navy formations, and they exist specifically to conduct large-scale amphibious landings. 4 of these 6 brigades sit under the Eastern Theater Command 72nd and 73rd Group Armies, positioned near the coastline, while 2 sit under the Southern Theater Command 74th Group Army. A landmark study from the China Maritime Studies Institute, China Maritime Report Number 20, authored by Dennis Blasco, states the matter directly. The PLA Army amphibious units, it concludes, would serve as the core of any joint force charged with invading the other side. That is not a stray comment buried in a footnote. It is the report's central finding, built around the observation that these Army brigades receive extensive combined arms support from their parent group armies, including fire support, air defense, aerial transport, and electronic warfare capabilities on a scale the smaller PL and Marine Corps brigades do not match. Secondary open-source analysis has further noted that these Army amphibious brigades are more heavily equipped than their Navy counterparts with stronger reconnaissance armor and air defense elements built in. So the honest count of China amphibious assault capacity is not 8 Marine brigades. It is 8 Marine brigades administratively organized under the Navy, plus 6 Army amphibious brigades organized under 3 group armies, and the second group is assessed by the relevant open-source literature as the larger, heavier, better supported force. Any analysis that stops at the Marine Corps chart has already missed roughly half the picture and arguably the more important half. If the PLA Army brigades are the main body, what is the PLAN, Marine Corps, actually for? The answer comes from the companion study to the one just discussed, China Maritime Report number 15, authored by Connor Kennedy, which carries the subtitle A Strategic Dagger in a Cross-Strait Invasion. The title alone signals the intended role. A dagger is not the main weapon of an army. It is a small, sharp, specialized instrument carried alongside a much larger force and used for precise, targeted tasks rather than the decisive blow itself. The report's own language reinforces this reading. It argues the PLAN Marine Corps is not being configured for a traditional landing operation, but is instead focused on new operational concepts that could provide unique capabilities in support of the larger campaign. It examines the Corps' likely role across 3 phases of a hypothetical invasion: preliminary operations, assembly and embarkation and transit, and finally assault landing and beachhead establishment, while placing particular emphasis on capabilities suited to operations beyond the initial beach assault itself. In plain language, the PLAN Marine Corps is being built for penetration, reconnaissance, and exploitation missions that run alongside or beyond the main landing, rather than to serve as the primary mass expected to break through the other side, main defended beaches. This framing lines up with the equipment and organizational choices actually observed in the Corps. Since the 2017 reforms, PLAN Marine Corps brigades have been restructured around combined arms battalions as the basic deployable unit, each brigade generating roughly 2 such battalions that integrate armor, infantry, reconnaissance, and fire support at a lower echelon than before. This modularity allows individual battalions to be pulled out and attached to naval task groups for specific missions, such as flank seizure, vertical envelopment by helicopter, or rapid exploitation once a lodgment already exists, rather than requiring the whole administrative brigade to move as one block. It is a structure built for precision and mobility, not for mass frontal assault. Understanding why these 2 forces exist separately requires understanding how the People Liberation Army actually organizes command authority. In routine peacetime conditions, every unit answers through what is generally called administrative control, the chain responsible for manning, training, equipping, and day-to-day discipline. For the PLAN Marine Corps, that chain runs to PLA Navy headquarters. For the Army Amphibious Brigades, it runs instead to their parent group Army, and above that to PLA Army leadership. These are genuinely separate institutional pipelines with separate budgets, separate promotion tracks, and separate training calendars. This separation is completely normal and mirrors how most modern militaries organize themselves during peacetime. The United States, for instance, maintains its own Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force as institutionally distinct services with separate administrative chains. And yet all 4 can and do fight together under a single operational commander once a real conflict begins. China 2015 and 2016 military reforms created exactly this kind of joint architecture for its own forces, establishing 5 theater commands specifically designed to pull together Army, Navy, Air Force, and Rocket Force assets under one operational authority whenever a real campaign requires it. The theater command relevant to occupying the other side scenario is the Eastern Theater Command, headquartered to oversee exactly this kind of contingency. Administrative control, in other words, peacetime ownership, stays with the parent services. Operational control, the authority that actually directs a campaign once it starts, shifts to the theater commander. This single structural fact resolves most of the confusion in popular commentary, because it explains why counting brigades under one service peacetime chart tells you almost nothing about who will actually be under whose command when a real operation begins. When Eastern Theater Command activates a joint amphibious landing campaign, the administrative boundaries between PLA Army and PLAN Marine Corps brigades effectively dissolve for the duration of the operation. Neither force disappears or is absorbed by the other. Instead, whichever combined arms battalions are needed for a given mission or task organized together under theater command direction, drawing from both service pools according to what the mission actually requires rather than which uniform a unit happens to wear. A PLA Army Amphibious Battalion and a PLAN Marine Corps Battalion could in principle embark on the same class of amphibious ship headed toward the same general campaign, while performing very different roles once ashore. The available evidence points toward a rough division of labor across the phases of such a campaign. In a preliminary shaping phase, PLAN Marine Corps Special Operations elements alongside other reconnaissance forces would likely conduct preliminary assault seizure of small outlying positions and disruption of coastal defense nodes, while the Army Amphibious Brigades begin marshalling and embarking along the mainland coast. In an assembly and transit phase, the bulk of available lift capacity, particularly amphibious transport docks and mobilized civilian shipping, would carry the massive Army Amphibious Combined Arms Battalions, given their greater armor and firepower, while PLAN Marine Corps battalions embark on the Navy helicopter-capable amphibious assault ships for missions built around vertical insertion. In the assault and beachhead phase itself, the Army Amphibious Brigades are the force assessed by the primary literature as forming the main landing waves, the ones tasked with establishing and expanding the actual beachhead against defended positions. PLAN Marine Corps elements in this framing are positioned to execute flank seizures, follow-on exploitation, and rapid reaction tasks that extend beyond the initial contested landing rather than leading it. This is a synthesis built from the two China Maritime Studies Institute reports rather than a leaked PLA planning document, and it should be understood as an analytical inference, not a verbatim campaign plan, but it is the most defensible reading the open source record currently supports. None of this is a uniquely Chinese innovation, and a useful historical comparison exists in the United States' own experience fighting across the Pacific during the Second World War. Over the course of that campaign, the United States committed roughly 22 Army divisions to Pacific operations, compared with 6 Marine Corps divisions. Popular memory of the Pacific War tends to center almost entirely on Marine Corps island assaults, names like Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa that dominate film and popular history. That popular memory, however vivid, does not reflect the actual distribution of amphibious operations across the theater. Under General Douglas MacArthur's Southwest Pacific area, the U.S. Army conducted the majority of Pacific amphibious landings by sheer volume across New Guinea, the Philippines, and numerous smaller island operations, while under Admiral Chester Nimitz' Central Pacific Drive, the Marine Corps executed a smaller number of famously costly and highly visible contested assaults. In raw numbers, the United States Army conducted more amphibious landings in the Pacific War than the Marine Corps did, even though the Marine Corps operations left the deeper mark on cultural memory. Force composition was driven by available mass, armor, and lift capacity, not by which service carried the more romantic name. This precedent matters because it demonstrates that mixed, Army-heavy amphibious campaigns are the historical norm for a modern industrial power waging a large-scale island campaign, not an anomaly. A force organizing its the other side, invasion around mass, sustained combined arms firepower, and available lift rather than around which service has Marine in its title, would simply be repeating a pattern already well established by the most extensively documented amphibious campaign in modern military history. Whether or not Chinese planners have explicitly studied this precedent, their structural choices produce a remarkably similar outcome. One further source of public confusion involves the amphibious ships themselves, particularly the Type Su-75 landing helicopter dock and the newer Type Su-76, which is still in sea trials and has drawn considerable attention for an electromagnetic catapult system designed to launch fixed-wing drones and combat UAV, a capability layered on top of the more traditional well-deck and helicopter facilities it shares with the Type Euro-75. These ships are frequently shown in commentary alongside PLAN Marine Corps Marines and framed as though their existence alone proves an imminent Marine-led assault on the other side beach. The reality is considerably less tidy. Open source reporting does not establish a single fixed pairing between specific ship hulls and specific brigades, and both the Type Zor-71 amphibious transport dock and the Type Yo-75 landing helicopter dock appear in reporting as shared lift asset, used by both Army and Marine elements according to mission need, rather than permanent ownership by one service. What can be said with more confidence is that these platforms serve two rather different strategic purposes for China more broadly. On one hand, they support the PLAN, Marine Corps' growing expeditionary mission, the same mission that maintains a rotational presence in Djibouti and underpins China ambitions for global power projection far from its own coastline. Missions where a smaller, mobile, helicopter-centric Marine force built along lines reminiscent of a U.S. Marine Expeditionary Unit makes genuine sense. On the other hand, in the specific and much shorter range problem of the other side landing procedure, mass and armor delivered by the Army heavier amphibious brigades, moved by a mixture of naval transport docks, landing ships, and mobilized civilian ferries, remains the force assessed as central to actually establishing and holding a beachhead. The same hardware, in other words, is being built for two genuinely different missions, and treating footage of a Type 75 or Type 76 as proof of an imminent all-marine to the other side, assault mistakes an expeditionary tool for a cross-strait one. This is a categorical error rather than a factual one, and it is worth naming clearly for anyone trying to read Chinese naval construction accurately. While China continues to rely on older landing ships like the Type UR-72, UR-73, and UR-74, its current amphibious fleet comprising 8 Type UR-71 docks, roughly the Type UR-72 tank landing ships, and 3 Type 75 ships and a single Type UR-76 still lacks the sea lift capacity required to transport the invasion's heavy main body. Furthermore, comparing the Type U-75 to the American Wasp-class is a misnomer. At 36,000 tons and operating exclusively with helicopters, the Type UR-75 performs a distinctly different role than the 40,000-ton Wasp with its F-35B short takeoff jets. Consequently, in a wartime scenario, China will inevitably depend on mobilized civilian roll-on, roll-off, or raw ferries to bridge this lift gap and deliver heavy armor across the strait. Pulling all of this together, the recurring error across much of the popular commentary on this subject is treating the PLAN, Marine Corps Peacetime 8 Brigade chart as though it were the messy time, the other side, invasion order of battle, when it is in fact a standing administrative structure maintained under the PLA Navy for entirely separate purposes. A second, related error is assuming that any service carrying the name Marine Corps must automatically function as the spearhead of an amphibious assault. An assumption drawn by loose analogy to the US Marine Corps rather than from anything in the actual Chinese source material, and one that the Pacific War-own history does not particularly support. A third error conflates the PLAN Marine Corps expeditionary branding, its Djibouti presence, and its increasingly capable amphibious ships with its specific to occupy the other side role, even though the Corps' own foundational open-source study frames it as a supporting force built for missions beyond the initial beach assault rather than the force that carries it out. A further point worth flagging for anyone analyzing this subject involves precision in sourcing. Not every infographic or breakdown that circulates online matches what is actually written in the primary literature, and some widely shared versions of this topic include invented unit designations, fixed brigade to ship assignment tables, or quotations attributed to the China Maritime Studies Institute reports that do not actually appear in those documents. The safest habit is to distinguish between claims that trace back to CMR 15, CMR 20, and comparable primary reporting and claims that merely sound plausible, since a viewer with access to the same publicly available reports could check and find the invented details missing entirely. The peacetime chart showing PLA Marine Corps 6 maneuver brigades, 1 special operations brigade, and 1 aviation brigade under the PLA Navy is accurate as far as it goes, but it answers the wrong question. The question that actually matters for occupying the other side scenario is not how many brigades wear the Marine Corps title, but which forces Eastern Theater Command would actually assemble and direct once a real joint campaign begins. On the strength of the 2 most relevant open-source studies from the U.S. Naval War College China Maritime Studies Institute, that assembled force would very likely place the PLA Army's 6 amphibious combined arms brigades in the main assault role, with the PLAN Marine Corps contributing a smaller, more specialized supporting effort built around vertical envelopment, flank seizure, and follow-on exploitation once the beachhead already exists. This is not a controversial or speculative claim invented for effect. It follows directly from language already published in the primary literature, cross-checked against the historical precedent of the Pacific War and against the basic architecture of China-owned 2015 and 2016 military reforms, which built theater commands for precisely this kind of cross-service integration. The correct habit for anyone analyzing this subject is not to count Marine brigades and stop there, but to ask which mixed, mission-driven joint force a theater commander would actually put together, because that is the structure that would determine the outcome of any real, the other side, contingency, not the peacetime organizational chart that so much popular commentary mistakes for it.